morning. Welcome to the Point. This week, we continue to introduce you to the new leaders of the Michigan Republican and Democratic Party. Last week, it was the GOP chief, Laura Cox. She talked to us about all things 2020, what she expected in the election cycle, and how she thought President Trump would weigh in as we go to the polls again in 2020. What we didn't talk about was a ruling by a three-judge panel. That panel decided that in those 2020 elections, Michigan would have to have new districts drawn for the state house, the state senate, and the U.S. House. And those state senate seats would be up for a vote again in 2020. Normally, that wouldn't happen until 2022. This week, we talked to the new head of the Michigan Democratic Party, Lavora Barnes. She talks about what she expects out of 2020, how she got into politics, and yes, we did have a chance to talk about that three-judge panel ruling. Let's start with the basics, because for those of us who have been around politics and working it pretty closely, you're certainly a familiar face, but there are a lot of people who aren't as involved, who may not yet have met you. So tell me a little bit about your background, what you've done. I know you've been very involved in politics, and how you came to be the chair of the Democratic Party at a time when we were talking, some of your staff and I were talking beforehand, as best we can tell, the only time both major parties have been led by women.
That's absolutely true.
Which I think is an interesting time too. But please tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm originally from Virginia. So I got my first start in politics in Virginia politics. One of my professors ran for office and asked for volunteers, and I raised my hand. And I've been raising my hand ever since. Worked on races there, eventually ended up at the White House. I worked in the Clinton White House in the Office of Media Affairs. So most of the early years were Virginia politics. And then I came to Michigan in the early 2000s and took a job with the State House, where first I was an organizer, and then you and I met when I was the communications director at the State House. And then after 7 years at the State House, which is a long time in politics to be anywhere, I took a break and left the State House and ended up being the 2012 state director for the Obama campaign. After that, I went with my friend Lisa Brown, who was the Oakland County Clerk and Register of Deeds, as her deputy, helping her run that office there. And then in 2015, when Lon Johnson decided he was going to run for Congress and step down as chair of the party, Brandon and I came to the party together as partners. Brandon Dillon as chair and me as the chief operating officer of the party. So manage the day-to-day operations of the party, manage the staff, manage the budget, the funds, all of that while Brandon was here. And then when Brandon was finished, because he's tired, because it's a hard job, I decided it was time for me to step up and run. And it felt like the right time, given we'd elected all of these terrific candidates, most of them women. It was time for the party to have a woman to lead it. We'd had one woman lead the Democratic Party in the past, in the 70s, Libby Maynard. So I decided to step up and run and become what is now the first African-American woman to lead this party, and I'm thrilled.
Well, congratulations on your election and being selected, but it's very important that we go back and review for just a minute. You just talked about all of your different experiences, and that brings something of import to this office, because you're in charge of an entire state. Some people have talked about trying to keep a party infrastructure together and all of the different stakeholders, like herding minnows. And but that's part of what you have to do. But you have that background. What do you, as you look at the state of the Democratic Party, the Michigan Democratic Party, after you point out a very successful election cycle, and we'll go through that in more detail in a moment, where are you now? What are the priorities right now, without getting into specific races that we will a little later on, that you want to tackle right away?
So the party's strong. I feel really good about the work Brandon and I did since we came in to strengthen the party and to grow this party, but we have more to do. So what I want to grow this party is to hire more field organizers. I think the way to victory for us is having grassroots organizers on the ground doing the work that we know they can do to help our volunteers and our friends talk to other voters, and then the grow the size of the membership of this party. I think like standing up to say you're a member of the party is the way you identify yourself in Michigan, since we don't register by party. So the more people we can get to raise their hands and say, yes, I am a member, that I think the better we'll all feel about the strength of this party. But we're in a good spot, and I feel really good about where we are and where we're going.
Talk to me about grassroots organization, because a lot of people throw that term around. You've done it, you've seen it done, but it really is about personal contact. And when people talk about running for office, particularly if you're talking about Congress or U.S. Senate or something like that, one of the first things somebody will say, well, I can't knock on all of the doors. Well, you as a candidate can't knock all of the doors That's where
You
the
know who can?
organizers. yeah.
Exactly. We can knock
Yeah.
on all of the doors. And that's what we do. That's what we did in 2018, and that's what we'll continue to do. When we hire organizers to organize in their communities from home, not allow the National Party or anyone else to send in folks from Philadelphia or Florida to work here, but hire locals to talk to their neighbors about what's important about being a Democrat, about our candidates and the issues they believe in, that's how you organize people. And that's how you convince them that it's important to participate in our democracy and to go vote, is to get folks on the ground talking to their neighbors about this. We can't just do it from up above. TV's great, I love it. Trust me, I love it. But we have to be able to have those conversations at the doors and on the phones with the voters, talking to their neighbors about what's important.
And when you talk about that organizational pattern, that plan that you put in place for the last election cycle, if my numbers serve me, 5 pickups in the House, 5 pickups in the Senate, which becomes, as a percentile, much more significant. 2 members of the United States House of Representatives, governor, and all of the constitutional offices. It's hard to walk away from that and say, gosh, I wish there was something more. I know you always do, but
there is more. Exactly.
But I mean, that was a heck of an election sweep. So that gives you a little bit of a head start going into this cycle.
It does, and we should note that that was an entire Democratic family, right? That was us working with our friends in the House and the Senate, working with other organizations who are progressive to make sure that we're getting out the vote and having those conversations. Those ballot initiatives also that were all passed were also an important part of that. So yeah, a great foundation 2018 was for what we need to do in 2020. We can pick up more seats in Congress. I know that we can. We can pick up the state House and make a Democratic majority in the state House in 2020. And of course, we can win for a Democratic presidential nominee. And then Gary Peters needs us to help him support it.
We're going to go through each of those races in detail, but let's talk a little bit about something that I didn't get a chance to talk with Chair Cox about last week, because just hours after we talked, there was a ruling from a 3-judge panel that said the face of the 2020 election may change, and it may change again. There may be more legal activity there. But as you and I said at this moment, to be clear that if it changes, we'll discuss that going into the show. But as we said at this moment, the House and the Senate have been tasked with redrawing district lines for state House, state Senate, and all of the U.S. House districts. And I thought this was as significant, a special election for state Senate in 2020 rather than 2022. Talk a little bit about the ruling, and then I've got some questions about some new challenges that might present for you as well.
So for us, this ruling was a vindication. We've been saying for years that these districts were drawn unfairly, that we were gerrymandered out of a fair fight in these districts, and that the important thing here is to draw some fair lines and to perhaps not have elected officials drawing their own districts, because then we end up with some bias and unfairness. So we're thrilled that the courts agree with us that those were indeed drawn unfairly and are excited to have the prospect of having them redrawn. I'm a little concerned about the timing, because here we are by August 1st, this has to be done, but we're still in the courts. There's likely to be an appeal, so we don't know where all of that's going to land, but we feel confident that given the opportunity to redraw those lines and have fair lines, we win more seats.
If you take a look at the district lines, and I think primarily the U.S. House lines, because when you look at that map, you see some weird configurations.
Very weird.
And as a reporter, I don't get to assign reasoning for those lines being drawn that way. But when you look at them, they're oddly drawn lines, and obviously you are excited about having those redrawn. Here's my question, and this is a question that I had the minute I saw the ruling. If you do this, if you can get this done, with Republicans drawing the lines in the House and Senate, the Democratic governor has to sign off on them. It's a pretty short period of time, even if there was no appeal. And you're trying to get a budget done. And some people would like to do no-fault insurance reform, auto insurance reform. That puts a big load on the plate, but it's just for one election cycle. Is that a lot of moving parts for one cycle when it's all going to happen again?
It's all going to happen again. It absolutely is a lot of moving parts, but I know on the Democratic side, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I feel good about our ability to get it done. I can't speak for the Republican legislature. I do know that it's important to us that we've got this governor now, because whatever they draw, given their track record, I'm going to be a little bit suspect of. And to know that she's going to have an eye on these as well, and that they don't go through without her signature, makes me believe believe that if we do this in 2020, they will at least be fair, because she'll make sure they are.
It's important to note that in 2022, and you mentioned the ballot initiatives, this is going to be an entirely different process. There'll be a commission. It'll be out of the hands of the legislature. And there were some, I think, absolutely brilliant ads that were run for that prop that showed these nice square little boxes being drawn for districts all around the state. That's not the way. That's going to go.
They're not going to be nice and neat and square. Right. And once the citizen panel gets together and figures that out, they'll draw fair lines, though. They won't go into this with any of their partisan gerrymandering thoughts. They won't go into it trying to pack Democrats into one place to make Republican districts, or the other way around. They will be fair, and I think that's what the people of Michigan are excited about, is finally having some lines that actually reflect the electorate.
Final question about this judge's ruling, because as we sit here and as this is airing on Sunday morning, we may have already seen legal activity. Yes. I know that's completely possible. But does it concern you at all that if new lines are drawn, it is conceivable, because there are only a few districts that have been mandated to be redrawn. Problem with that is I can't redraw this district without impacting that district.
It's strange how they're all connected.
Right, yes. That's how that works out. So are you worried that some of your members could be drawn together in districts, because that could be an outcropping, right?
It is very possible, and I think that all of our members are all looking at these maps wondering what they might look like on both sides, probably. So I do think that's a possibility, but that's a possibility every time we redraw these lines. I think the big question for us is how does that impact us in 2022, because those are the lines that we will carry for 10 years. These lines, these 2-year lines, will be interesting, but we'll deal with it. We'll be fine.
When we come back, there is much more to talk about. Exactly how do you approach running in 110 House seats? And if we really do have a special Senate election, how does that impact the overall election? Because after all, senators weren't expected to run for another 2 years in 2022. Plus, those U.S. House races, a very important U.S. Senate race. And we'll look at the Trump effect from the standpoint of the new chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. That's all next when we return to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. We're talking with the leaders of the Michigan GOP and the Michigan Democratic Party. Last week, it was the Republican chair. This week, the new chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, Lavora Barnes. We talk about the 2020 elections. What do you do with all those House races? How would a special Senate race figure into this election cycle? And what about the effect of President Trump? Let's talk about specific races, and I'm going to start with the State House. Okay. You said earlier that you felt the Democrats could take back the State House. We have certainly seen that happen in the past, though. There is that historic precedent. You picked up 5 in the last election cycle. I know you want to contend in all 110 seats, but the reality is that there are certain of those that you feel that are easier to flip than others. So how targeted do you get?
So we get very targeted, right? You've seen how the House Caucus does their operation. I worked there for 7 years, right? We find the seats that we have the best opportunity in, and we focus there. Doesn't mean we don't also focus other places, because we also find opportunities that we didn't expect because we're playing in other races. And that's part of the important part of having a partnership between the party and the House Caucus. The House Caucus can do their very specific targeted work, and we can support other candidates around the state to make sure they're in a good position to take advantage of whatever wave we may create in 2020, hopefully, and allow us to find even more opportunities than the ones we think we have right now.
One of the things that in the off-year elections, sometimes you get a little bump from your friends over in the Senate because they don't have to run. Well, this time around, maybe they do. Yeah. That changes the dynamic a little bit for them and for you, I would guess.
It does, but think about this. When does the Senate get to run with the president? Right? This is a big deal, I think, for Senate possibilities, because of the way the terms have been set, the Senate never gets to run with a president at the top of the ticket. So once we have a presidential nominee and are working on a presidential race, we're going to lift all boats with the work that we're going to do with that, and that's going to help us fight for those Senate seats even better. I think if we do this in 2020, we've got a shot at the House and the Senate.
It dawns on me, and if you don't know, forgive me for asking the question, this would just be a 2-year remainder of the term, the way I understand it. So it would not change the Senate races and the dates on those going forward, just for this cycle, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those Senate races. If they do come to pass, does that create unforeseen opportunity, looking at some of those other Senate seats where you might like to contend.
Absolutely does. I think there are places where we may have been looking forward to for 2022 that we might have a shot at it in 2020, and we'll be ready to take advantage of all of those opportunities. It's interesting, the Senate usually has 4 years to prepare for races and to raise money, and I know Senator Ananich is already out there raising money on this because he's going to be ready for whatever it needs to be, and we're all going to make sure that we're ready to stand up all of these races all over the state.
And his is one of the districts that would be redrawn. In fact, I think most of them will be. But anyway, if that
in
happens.
the end,
Yeah,
I think
if that
yes.
happens. Let's talk a little bit about what that does. One of the major functions that you have to oversee, deal with, and be very hands-on, I suspect, is fundraising. And people, I think, have a misconception about money in politics. Yes, I'm sure that there is money in politics that shouldn't be in politics, but there's also a lot of necessary money that has to be raised because these races don't happen in a vacuum.
They do not. No, we have to raise the money to make sure that we can pay those organizers that we put on the ground, and we pay them a nice fair wage because that's what we believe in here at the Democratic Party. We have to keep the doors open. We have to be able to do the advertising that we do for our candidates, print the literature, all of that. So yes, lots of fundraising. I like to say to people, the eyes of the nation are on Michigan, which also means that there's money that I can raise from folks outside of Michigan even to help support the work that we're doing here, and I'm doing as much as I can to make sure we bring in all the money. But our folks here in Michigan are doing a terrific job of stepping up and providing funding for us to do the work that we're doing. It's a good cycle for us so far.
You've been watching this for a long time. Have the dynamics changed here from this perspective? I remember when I first came here, and some of the folks that were in leadership of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party would say, the path to the White House comes through Michigan. And that has been partially true, but it has also been a rather lopsided affair since 1988 for Democratic candidates running for president here in the state until the 2016 cycle. And that's just one cycle. But all of a sudden, both parties seem to have a renewed interest in Michigan. I almost feel like Michigan is the new Ohio.
Absolutely.
In some ways. Are we getting that kind of attention?
We are getting that kind of attention. And it's funny because I think a lot of the perception was that it was easy for us, all of those cycles, all of those years to win those presidential candidates. But if you think about the campaign that Barack Obama ran in 2008 and 2012, we worked hard for those votes. And I think that the goal here is to make sure that we don't ever again fall down on our duty as a party to make sure that we're going after every vote all over the state. And that's what the attention around the country is about, is like, how do we help this party not have 2016 happen again and make sure that we are maintaining a strong Democratic Party in Michigan to make sure that we're ready for whatever happens in the presidential election.
When you talk about all over the state, President Obama won Kent County in the 2004 cycle, I believe. No, I'm sorry, 2008.
Yes.
The 2008 cycle. I think that was the first time since perhaps 1960.
I think you're right about that.
So,
yes.
I mean, that is part of the game plan for you and your fellow Democrats, is to expand the map.
That's exactly right, because there are Democrats all over this state. And we don't win this state by concentrating on 5 or 6 counties. We have to concentrate on every Democrat all over the state and make sure they come out and vote. So we will be running everywhere, not just in some counties.
We talked about State House, we talked about State Senate. Let's talk a little bit about congressional seats. You picked up 2 in this last cycle. And when you think about it again, those are big numbers out of 14 to pick up 2 seats. And as you, I suspect, would agree, the most vulnerable time for members of Congress are their freshman year. So you may have a couple of races on your hand there. Mm-hmm. But you said you also have other interest when it comes to those congressional seats. How big a component is that in your overall plan?
It's a huge component. I think that 2020 is a year where we can pick up at least 1 more seat, probably somewhere in your neighborhood. And maybe more, because I think we've got some good folks interested in running for Congress, and we've got some great opportunities to talk about issues that are important to people here in Michigan that perhaps are rising to the surface this cycle that will be important in helping us pick up seats. So, and plus we have to make sure we take care of protecting the Representatives Stevens and Slotkin, who are doing a terrific job in their first term. They're going to be great.
Not to give away any of your strategy, but I assume you're referring to the 6th District that I've seen a lot of national correspondence on.
Yes.
So this, again, spreads your map out,
yes.
which, once again, gives you more need for more money and more people. So
Exactly.
this gets to be a bigger, even if the opportunity is bigger, the responsibility gets bigger.
That's exactly right, because we can't do any of it without the funding and the resources to make it happen. So it does get bigger for us, and it's not just, I think one of the things people think in a presidential year is that the party concentrates only on that top of the ticket, and I believe very strongly that this party's job is to elect Democrats all the way down the ticket, which means that we're going to raise the funds and build the resources to make sure we're helping everybody from the top all the way to the bottom of that ticket.
Final state-specific race is that U.S. Senate seat.
Yeah.
And again, like members of the House, members of the Senate are most vulnerable, generally speaking, in their freshman term, where Senator Peters is. How big a fight's that going to be?
It depends on who the Republicans get in the race. I think they're casting about, looking for someone to run. I've heard some names that I won't mention here, but I'm sure you have heard. Senator Peters is doing a terrific job as a senator. He's doing a terrific job putting together a good campaign. He will run hard. He will work hard. He's a hard-working man. He will be fine, and we will do everything we can to support him. But I'm confident that Senator Peters will be reelected.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Democrats in the last election cycle, not only did they work and raise money, but they also had a little wind at their back.
Yeah.
They had been energized by the 2016 cycle.
Yeah.
And I take nothing away from the hard work that candidates did or you as a party did, but you did start with a little bit of a historical advantage because the first term election, the 2-year election after a newly elected president, and that may have been on steroids on this cycle because of the resist and other movements. So you had that wind behind your back, again, taking nothing away from the hard work you did. Is that still there in significant numbers that it helps you in addition to what your efforts are going to be in this cycle?
Yes. Let me tell you something. I've been traveling around the state since I've been chair, going to meetings all over the state, and these rooms are packed with Democrats who are still fired up, still excited to work hard, still angry about the Trump election, and still angry about what's happened since that president has been elected. So yeah, that wind is still there, that energy is still there, that excitement to make change is still there, and it'll be there all the way through the 2020 election.
Obviously, I had your counterpart on last week. She looks at the Trump presidency and his presence in the state, and he's been here just recently, as a positive base builder for Republicans. You see that on maybe as much as a base builder for you. From your perspective, it's a total, it would be a net negative from the Trump influence on this campaign. But how do we gauge that? How do we know? We certainly didn't know how to gauge it in 2016.
No, we didn't. I think the difference that for us in 2020 is going to be that we will have our troops on the ground having the conversations with the voters. So we'll know when the voters are telling us what they believe are the issues that we should be talking about, and we'll be following that very carefully. I am confident every time that president opens his mouth or shows up here in Michigan, our numbers jump up, money comes in the door, people raise their hands to volunteer because they all know that he's going to contest Michigan again, and we're going to have to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, to fight back, and we will.
What do you think, and I know you would like to say win everything,
Yes,
but
win it all.
when you go through the 2020 cycle, how do you gauge your success? Just as in terms of wins, I get it, but there has to be some kind of a benchmark because there's always going to be the opposition and there's always going to be pushback.
Yes, no, there always will be. I think that number one, we reelect Gary Peters, and I think that happens, frankly, because that's an important thing to make happen, and because Gary will be a terrific candidate and help make that happen. Number two, we make sure that we win Michigan for whoever our presidential nominee is, and number three, we win a state house so that we have, and I think we can accomplish all of those things, and when we do, I'll do a little victory lap around the state, and it'll be great.
So that's a look from the Democratic side. If you happen to miss last week's program, go to woodtv.com and you can compare the thoughts of the chair of the Democratic Party and the chair of the Michigan Republican Party by watching both of our programs. And of course, this is only the beginning of our coverage of the 2020 elections, and we still don't know exactly how they'll shape up. There could be some more legal action when it comes to that 3-judge panel ruling. We'll keep on top of that as well, and we'll be back with more To the Point. So the 2020 elections are really already upon us. We've already seen President Trump, Senator Bernie Sanders, and others campaigning on the presidential level. But as you've seen in this last half hour, there are a lot of state races we'll be watching as well. And while all of that's going on, in Lansing, they're still trying to come up with a budget solution. The governor still wants a 45-cent gasoline tax increase, but so far the legislature hasn't budged on that. Will that be a negotiating tool, and will they be able to raise more money? We'll be watching when you watch us every Sunday morning. To the Point.